Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jeremy, founder of Quickmail.io.
And this is Jack from emailsthatsell.com.
Are you A/B testing your cold emails? Today, you'll not only see why you need to be testing, but also the right way to A/B test cold emails. In this cast, all about the ins and outs of A/B testing. We'll cover the main pitfalls to avoid when setting up successful A/B testing, some actionable tips to double and even triple your reply rate easily, and finally, why focusing on email content alone may not be what is needed to drastically reach this reply rate you've been waiting for. Enjoy. A/B testing, that's what we're going to talk about today, right, Jack?
That's right. We're going to be going over the A/B testing do's and don'ts, a good cast if you're getting ready to set up a new A/B test or if you're looking to do some better testing moving forward with your campaigns so you get those positive replies coming in faster and more often.
Yeah, that's the goal here, right? Getting a lot of replies.
Yeah, and testing is pretty much the only way you can hope to make your campaign better over time. And if you haven't set up an A/B test yet, go ahead and do so this week because that's what's going to make the difference. It's essentially taking a scientific approach to improving a cold email campaign.
Jack, that sounds boring. Do I have to do that?
No, you don't have to do that. And probably most cold emailers aren't, just out of maybe laziness, or maybe it's not a point that has been grasped just yet. But if you do take the time to do A/B tests often, you're going to be rewarded with higher reply rates, more closing, more sales if that's what you're going for. It's what every good marketer has learned to do over time. And that's just stop guessing what's going to work with your audience and instead try a few different approaches and keep the ones that are working.
That's kind of interesting because a lot of people are interested in stats in Quickmail. So they like to see, so that visibility is important, but then that's where they stop. And to me, having A/B testing allow you to go from the 10% reply rate up to the 20 or 30% reply rate. And if you think about this, you're literally doubling or tripling the number of replies, which means you can go with half of the leads you're currently using or a third of the leads you're currently using and still have the same reply rate on a weekly basis. So that's definitely pretty important.
The benefits for A/B testing are pretty clear to anyone sending cold emails, but setting up an A/B test can be done incorrectly. And today, let's get into what you should do when setting up and running an A/B test campaign and what you must avoid at all costs in order to keep improving your reply rates.
All right, so what should you do?
So I've got a short list for the do's and the don'ts. Jeremy, I bet you have the same. Let's go through our do's. I'll start with revisit your tests weekly. It's important to come back to what you've set up last week in order to do two things. First, that's to turn off the emails that are underperforming, and also create a new test each week. This is going to keep you optimizing your campaign every week so that you just keep seeing your reply rates improve. But it's important to keep coming back to your A/B tests so that you can make decisions based on the results that came in and continue with your testing so that you get those 30 or 40% golden reply rates that you're looking for.
That also was a point for me to do weekly testing. One thing to be mindful of is that some weeks are going to be stronger than others. Like if you start your sequence at the end of the year versus if you start your sequence at the start of the year, then you're definitely going to see a difference. So be mindful about leaving a few weeks for each variation that you have so as to minimize this sort of effect. And you may also get replies on the fifth touch. So don't be so quickly to judge on your reply rate for an A/B testing that you set up.
Okay, so we just covered one do, revisit your test weekly, and a don't from Jeremy, don't end a test too early. Let's keep it going. So another do I have, do make drastic changes, especially in the beginning of a campaign. So when I say drastic changes, I'm talking about rewriting the email copy from start to finish, as opposed to tweaking a line or a word here and there so that the emails look pretty much the same. In the beginning, you want to go, I like to see it as coming from many different angles. And later, as your testing continues, then you can start moving towards finer adjustments once you've found an approach that works. So, a couple of examples. In the beginning, you may be asking if a founder of a company would be interested in trying out. Maybe you could send them a free trial of a piece of software. You could also try another approach where it just asks if this is something that the company is struggling with at the moment. So notice you're trying to get a conversation started with a founder, but two very different ways of accomplishing that goal.
And also, you're not going to have the volume that is sufficient enough to do small, really small variations. I know that Pinterest, for example, they do like multi-test variations, with tweaking each word. Like, are they going to say the action button or the push button, or those sort of like very fine-tuned A/B testing? We just don't have the volume for being able to do so. So by having like drastic variations, then you minimize this sort of effect of that volume can have on your campaign.
What if I have a really large market? Can I argue that I do have enough prospects that I can run these really specific A/B tests if I have, let's say, over 1,000 prospects I can contact?
From a scientific standpoint, it's very, very, very unlikely. You're going to need thousands and thousands of emails sent. So unless you want your campaign to last, I don't know, like 2 years to really figure it out, then that's not going to play out very well. In fact, I remember I put an A/B testing for a website with just changing a few words, and the statistic significance was, I don't know, like 30 weeks of trial, and I had like 5,000, unique visitors per day. So we're really talking about huge number. So the more drastic the variations, the more chances that you're going to find out faster if this is the right direction or not. And I think this is all we're looking at this stage.
One of my don'ts I have written down here is don't approach cold email A/B testing like a landing page. And that just comes back to the mentality that you have when you run a test. Just like Jeremy said, if you wait too long to achieve statistical significance that would help out a marketer of a site that has hundreds of thousands of visitors a month, then you'll never declare a winner. You'll never have enough confidence to know which test won. So instead, I recommend, coming back to one of my do's, I recommend sending a test variation to at least 100 prospects.
Yeah, I got the same number. That's great. Minimum 100 people.
Perfect. Jeremy, you have another one?
Yeah, I'll say be careful with false positives. And that's kind of touching on what we were just talking, but I would think about aggregating audience, for example. So one of the do is do segment very well before you're running your A/B testing. Let's say, for example, your guy that wanted to contact the entire market. Maybe inside there is marketeers, maybe there is salespeople. And if you aggregate all of that, because they will resonate with different offering, you may very well have false positives. So let's say, for example, you do an A/B testing, variation A is showing point 1 as a super benefit, where variation B is showing point 2 as a super benefit. Maybe point 1 is resonating with marketeers and point 2 is resonating better with salespeople. So if you aggregate those two ones, you're never going to get a real sense of what really works. And then you're just going to pick up things pretty much at random or think that A/B testing doesn't work. So you have to be extremely careful as to your input is consistent. And the more narrow you can have your input, the better your results are going to be and trust it, basically.
That makes sense. So it's basically the cleaner your segments are that you send these test emails to, the easier it will be to determine a reliable outcome. That dovetails nicely into my next do for A/B testing. I recommend testing different segments. So you could even use the exact same email copy, just finding out which audience is more receptive to the offer. So maybe you're sending, and by the way, I feel like many cold emailers are sending emails to several job titles. Even if it's just one or two, there's really no definite way to find out who in an office will be responsible for what you're proposing. So if you're sending to CEOs, co-founders, and VP marketing, you may decide to break those down into different segments and just find out with a small test to see which employee or which person will be most receptive so that you can do some learning to figure out who you should target moving forward.
You could even go with testing actually different sources, like a certain web directory or LinkedIn or Facebook groups, and then figuring out where is your actual best sources of prospects.
And also along the same lines, instead of just making a test between job titles, like the co-founder or VP marketing, instead maybe try playing around with company size or industries that they're in, or even events that may have taken place. So maybe they just brought on more funding, they've hired somebody recently, and just look for patterns while you're testing different segments. You may find that one segment outshines all others that you've tried to contact before. And if that's the case, your job has become much easier because you can pick a very specific segment to reach out to and write a campaign that's just for them. Things will work much easier when you have identified who to reach out to and what message is resonating with them most.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying because maybe we should have specified, but a lot of people are always thinking content when they're thinking of A/B testing, where there is actually a lot to do with actual source of where you're getting people, how you segment them, and things like that. That could also lead to very powerful A/B testing results.
In fact, I'll go so far to say is that's where the most important learning takes place. If you can identify your hot list, things get easier. It's not going to be as difficult to get them on the phone with you or to start a conversation. If you haven't tested which segment to contact, that's very interesting and pretty quick test to run that'll hopefully give you some really helpful results. Jeremy, I want us to change gears a little bit and talk about something technical. And this is how I would set up an A/B test within Quickmail. And if you're a listener familiar with Quickmail, Jeremy, why don't you tell us about creating a new campaign with fresh stats as you test if this is a good idea or not, and how that might look like for somebody who's in their Quickmail dashboard.
Yeah, sure. If you want to be specific, what I found works really well, and we have people doing different things, different ways. That's totally cool. But what I find works super well is people actually just cloning their sequence and just starting another week. And one of the reasons for that is because effectively you can start getting replies on the fifth touch or on the seventh touch. So that's an easy way to sort of compare. One of the things that I've seen also works pretty well is on a per touch basis. People just create every week like a different variations and then they pose the other one, like what you suggested at the beginning of the cast. That works pretty well. One thing I would discourage people from doing is doing a lot of testing based on a subject line. I mean, as we've seen in episode 10, you probably should limit it to probably like 3 tests using something like a generic subject line, quick question or whatever. And another one was just dropping the company name and then see if there is like big difference. But that's pretty much what you should limit yourself to in a subject line. And then you just pay attention to your deliverability rate by just looking at the open rate. Because otherwise what could happen is you're starting an A/B testing on your subject line and then suddenly, it's dropping and you're not quite sure if this is your deliverability that goes down or if this is actually because people don't open the email. So try to limit. It's kind of something like people always want to do, but at the end of the day, this is not where the most points are going to be won. So that's not where you win the war.
I think you nailed like my favorite side benefit of creating a new sequence as you test. It's so nice to know what that campaign's open rate is on a weekly basis, because that gives you a really accurate pulse on how your deliverability is doing on a week by week basis. because if you're sending emails for a long time from a single sequence or campaign, it's an average open rate that you're going to see. And it's a little bit scary because if you've had strong open rates for 7 weeks and all of a sudden on week 8, you only have a 10% open rate across that campaign, you won't see it clearly in the stats. So always a good idea to think about creating a brand new sequence as you're testing each week.
Yeah, and while we're here, one of the most important thing I would say is to really test the entire thing. So just to take some example that I can think of that everyone can relate to, there had been some studies on advertisements and what people do remember after the advertisement. So if you're wondering why your washing machine powder advertisement is boring as fuck, it's just because people remember it, right? They figured out that, having an amusing advertisement is not necessarily leading to better sales. So what I would say is test the right things. It's fine, to get a better reply rate, but it has to be a positive reply rate and ideally to even lead to a sale or some sort of objective that you have. And if you're too narrow focused on that A/B testing specifically, you're going to miss the big picture here and you're going to rely on vanity metrics that are not necessarily moving your bottom line. So I would say go as close as you can to the end results. And because you brought it up, Jack, in Quickmail, I will just basically go ahead with labels and actually label the end result. It was success and then we closed, and then look at that rate across your campaigns. And I think that will give you the real picture, not that people are opening high opening, but low conversion at the end, but actual real conversion that leads to real sales.
Well said. You've nailed one of the don'ts on my list. So important to focus on the results, not the metrics behind them. I've seen campaigns that have more positive replies than others that at the end of the day just don't convert into sales. Maybe the market I reached out to was interested, but they just didn't have the funds needed to carry on with the close. So it's easy to just follow positive replies and declare winners when in reality, if you look at the results, that's not the greatest decision to make. So yeah, results trump metrics every time.
What next do you have on your list?
One of my don'ts here, don't copy templates that you find online. There's a couple reasons for this. The biggest reason here is if you blindly copy templates, it probably won't work for your business because that template was carefully matched with a certain segment and a certain offer. It may or may not have done well. It doesn't take any stats to post a template online. So you may be copying something that fell flat. But more importantly,
Jack, I found a template. It says 80% reply rate. I mean, it must be good, right?
It must be good. You know what?
On 10 emails.
Yeah, look at that. So we had an entire cast on fake stats, I think, about cold email. Just be really careful because, like you said, if you send it to 10 people, yeah, you can say it's an 80% reply rate, but what if they were all your existing customers, or if they were all people in your family, or, I'm not saying that's out there, but it doesn't translate directly to your business. But what I recommend instead, please find templates, read through them, but instead of copying them blindly, think about why they worked. Think about why they may work with a particular segment. Was it the approach they used? Was it a very specific way of connecting that person with a prospect in the intro sentence? Was it the call to action? Did it offer a lot of value? Could you offer a similar thing in your email? Use templates as sort of an inspiration, not a carbon copy to fuel your A/B test. And that way you'll hopefully pick up some fresh ideas of what you should be testing and what you think your market would respond best to.
As a side note, this was episode 23.
Okay, and I have one more. Don't stop testing. Even when you do get the 35, 40% positive reply rates, pat yourself on the back, but carry on. As long as you still have a market to reach out to, continuing your testing is the only way you can ensure you get better and better. And once you get to these really strong reply rates, as Jeremy mentioned in the beginning of the cast, things get easier, such as you won't need to do as much prospecting every week in order to hit your quotas. You'll be able to spend more time per prospect because you're not just sending out a whole bunch of cold emails. And finally, you'll be dealing with higher qualified prospects and leads as they come in. So you won't waste your time as much with sales conversations. So hopefully your reply rates improve, your positive and negative reply ratios improve, and also your close rates go up. So if you're in sales, this is sort of the top of the pyramid here where you want to be. But just make sure you continue testing in order to get there.
On top of that, the market may change. So it's still important to even keep up with the market and realize if there is some drop in the demand somehow. And then that way that will prevent you from going for volume because you're not really knowing how to get more replies.
Your templates, even though you're testing them every week, if you send the same one, it could be that they lose their effectiveness with time. I mean, there's a couple reasons for this. The market may have seen them already or heard about them, depending how specific the audience you're reaching out to is. But also, if Google finds that you're sending similar templates out many times a day, many times a week, then they could throttle you back on deliverability, and it could turn out that that exact template might not inbox as strong. So it's just yet another reason you want to continue to modify the email copy that you're sending out. So don't stop testing and work your way towards those magic positive reply rates that we've talked about.
I may start doing the quick question subject line as a filter to go directly into my cold email folder.
Exactly what we're talking about. Like maybe 3 years ago, quick question worked incredibly, but you've seen it. So just goes back to what we're talking about, just keeping it fresh and trying different approaches each week so that your cold emails don't go stale.
Right. Thanks, Jack.
Okay. Thanks, Jeremy. So there you have it. If you haven't created an A/B test yet, you know what you need to do to achieve your golden reply rate. But before you set up your next A/B test, here's 3 important things you need to keep in mind. First, test often. Revisiting your tests on a consistent basis is the only reliable way you can keep boosting your reply rates. Second, test your segments. Run tests to identify your hottest prospects so that you can focus your efforts on the most profitable group in your market. And finally, results are more important than vanity metrics. Declaring test winners based on the adjusted positive reply rate is a good start, but at the end of the day, it's revenue that matters. So do not hesitate to add sales labels in Quickmail or your CRM so that you can track your campaign's real results. Hey, cold emailer.
Yeah, you.
If you got some value from this episode, give us a high five by sharing a 2-sentence review on iTunes.
Or Stitcher or TuneIn. That works too.
It's a quick way to help other growth-minded folks like us find this podcast
so they can send awesome emails
and make everyone's inbox a better place.